Hello. Welcome to my talk, Organising Your Dev Life with Obsidian. I am Charlie Cassidy. Also go by Char, they, them pronouns. I'm a UI engineer over at Sledgehammer Games in Melbourne, Australia. And I've been using Obsidian since 2021. A few weeks ago was my 4-year anniversary with Obsidian. Yes, I track that. I have my own work vault that I use to organize myself at work, and I have a separate personal vault that I use to organize myself outside of work and other projects and stuff. But why should you listen to me talk about Obsidian? Well, I like to iterate constantly on my processes. Most importantly, Obsidian has helped my AuDHD brain stay on top of things in life and at work. And Obsidian is basically a special interest to me at this point. I get great joy out of using it, tweaking it, and I'm very excited to speak about it today. So yeah, let's go over what we're going to cover. So we are going to cover what Obsidian is and some different note types that you can use in Obsidian. I'm not going to go into huge depth on how to use Obsidian in the basic sense, like how to create a note, or that's something hopefully after today, if you have never used Obsidian before, I could probably point you to resources to figure out how to use it more basically and that such, but this is gonna kind of be a inspirational, what can I do with Obsidian? Because a lot of people don't even know where to start with setups and stuff. I created an example vault for all the screenshots that you will see later in this talk. It's kind of a mash of my work vault and my personal vault, which are two separate things that I kind of organize slightly differently, just because of the differences between work and my own projects. But we're going to go over the para-folder structure theory, why I needed this. I also modified it, so we're going to talk about why. Templates, and then we're going to talk about project organization, both for accompanying existing task management systems like Jira. Maybe you have a Trello, Asana. But then we're also going to talk about project organization contained fully within Obsidian. So maybe you have smaller projects that don't make sense having a big task management software system for. Maybe Obsidian makes sense for that. Then we'll talk about a dashboard that I made, and we'll talk about some automations. So I'm assuming some knowledge that you'll either already have or be prepared to go and get. So you know what markdown is, at least vaguely. There are code portions in here. The whole talk isn't about the code I wrote for some of my automations and systems I made. But I'm not going to go into how the code works, just what you can do with it, so that maybe you get an idea of what you could do with it. Yeah, but yeah, there's plenty of stuff that's not code specific as well. So let's go. What is Obsidian? Maybe I should have done that before that slide, but look, it's a markdown note-taking app. There's some terminology. A vault is basically a collection of notes and folders. Any number of notes and folders, markdown formatted notes, canvas notes. There are now base notes, which is a new database feature that Obsidian just added like 3 or 4 weeks ago. You can, depending on plugins you can also have Excalibur notes, PDFs. You might have scripts that sit in there and get run. Another term I'm going to use is metadata. So your notes can have metadata associated with them, and that's not just their file creation or modified data. You can assign properties to notes that you can use to quickly find stuff later or display in queries that we'll talk about later. And you can also include and display images in your notes. I get a lot of people asking me about that when they hear about Obsidian and it's a markdown note-taking app. They're like, yeah, but can I have an image in there? Yeah, you can preview images in it and you can just paste them in. It's great. But let's talk about note types. Basically, the main note you're probably going to use is a classic markdown note. Up the top is what it looks like when you're using Obsidian. Down the bottom is physically what is actually the data in that note. So there's markdown, there's some YAML there, but day-to-day using it, it looks like up the top. And properties have a little user interface, which is good. You don't have to write YAML. You can if you want. And then you have Canvas notes, which is, it uses the OpenJSON Canvas file format. Basically, you can add cards, you can write in them, you can put code snippets in there. Some plugins let code snippets display information. Like I have that's my dashboard that I'll talk about later. Properties, metadata. So properties are stored at the top of the note using YAML. Tags and alias are the standard ones that come predefined, but you can add however many of your own you want, whatever makes sense for you. And yeah, data view also allows for inline properties, which I'll show later, but that just means you can write a property in the middle of the note and write the value after it, and it allows you to surface that later, specifically in data view. Obsidian itself doesn't support inline properties in its itself. You'd need the plugin data view. So I'm going to talk about paramethod and folder structure. What is it and why should I care? This is probably what revolutionized my organizational capabilities, was coming across the paramethod. So let me take you back to before I organized my Vault in this way. Basically, I didn't know where anything was. I didn't know where anything belonged. It was pretty chaotic. So I'd waste a lot of time and energy trying to pick somewhere that made sense for a note at the time. And when I went back to look for that note, I didn't know where I'd put it. It wasn't the same place that I thought it belonged. And so I ended up with, I counted at one point, I had the same note existing in 3 separate locations with almost identical content in it. And this is what I found it when I was restructuring my Vault. So I was going through every single note that I had, and I'm like, why do I have this 3 times in 3 very different places? So yeah, there were multiple spots where a note could make sense to fit, and my memory does not excel at remembering where I put something. I needed somewhere that always made sense. I needed a system to counter my memory. But what is the paramethod? Well, it stands for Project Area Resource and Archive. It's a way of thinking about how your notes can be split up into distinct places that they belong. Basically, Para states that there are only 4 categories that encompass all the information in your life, which I agree and disagree with. Evidently, because I modified it, I don't fully agree with that. But I like it because for my brain, there is usually one place a thing will belong, and that's important. So let's break down what those things are. Projects are things you're working on that are kind of more short term. And while game dev isn't short exactly, making a game, but you may work on multiple games over a period of time. Maybe you want to split your projects into I guess you could split it into features on a game, but anyway, it's short term. Whereas area is more long-term, ongoing things that you manage. So I'll talk more about examples of what might fit into area in your day job or your game dev life. Resource, topics or interests that may be useful in the future. And archive, just inactive notes from other categories. You don't need to reference it anymore, but you don't want to delete it. Now, how and why did I modify it? Well, I modified para to be Capre or CacPre in my personal vault. So I added a calendar folder, which was just to keep track of all my daily, weekly, and monthly notes. I added a knowledge folder in my personal vault as for all my study-related stuff. And I added an inbox, which is where any quick notes go to be filed somewhere appropriate later. This is incredibly handy because this also counters my, I need to quickly make a note about a meeting that I'm in right now. I don't know where it belongs. It just goes in the inbox. At the end of the day, I file it where it belongs. Now, one might say I've defeated the purpose of para by adding to it and thus making my system less simple. But that's not what's important here. I think what's important is not what I changed it to, but the fact that I changed it to something that suits my brain. You can take aspects of organizational structures that work for you and tailor them into a thing that works with you and your brain, which is kind of all about what my talk is find what works for you. And I'm hoping what works for me might inspire something in you. So some content examples of the area folder. I like to have a personal folder in there, even at work, and this is kind of a section organizing myself at work. So maybe my goals, professional development stuff, managing me at work. And then maybe you have a folder for your team or department or some features or syncs or any planning, whatever works for you. Another thing to note about what the para method has to say about folder depth is that you should only ever have one additional layer of folder depth. But again, I say do what works for you. If you think only having one more additional layer of folder depth is great, great. I, in my personal vault, have I have one more depth in the area folder than this, because I have a personal and professional folder, and then I have stuff in there. And then resource folder, well, it's just stuff you might want to quickly reference often, and I would say don't have whole comprehensive guides in there. You should probably have that in documentation where everyone can reference it and access it. But maybe you have quick links to that documentation. Maybe you have a step that you're always forgetting and you want to note it down somewhere without having to go look up the documentation for it, that sort of thing. But yeah, what should you use? Well, yeah, if you don't vibe with the para-style structure, that's fine. Maybe the chaos does work for you. Impressive. I thought it did for me for a while, but yeah, what it comes down to is what works for your brain is probably what I'm going to say many times today. And maybe the folders don't matter at all to you either. You can add tags to your notes as a property, and you can search for notes via tags. Maybe you just tag all your notes, and that's how you find everything. That's a perfectly valid way to use Obsidian, and I've seen lots of people do it. But one takeaway I would give is I highly recommend the inbox folder, because as I said earlier, it just means that you don't have to think about where a note belongs if you need to create it right now to write something in, and then you can figure it out later. That's helped me a lot. Let's talk about templates though. So I have daily, weekly, and monthly notes. Some I use more than others for different things. Now, templates make these notes fast and easy. I found when I first started using Obsidian, before I started using templates, I'd gotten into the habit of, well, I did use a template to start with for my daily notes because it's kind of, the plugin for it is set up and asks you, do you want to insert a template? But I didn't really fully utilize templates at first. I was still manually writing the day. I was still manually adding certain things on certain days. But then I realized I could do stuff, like I could have the tasks plugin and I could have a query that would display everything I'd completed that day, every task that I'd ticked off, which is basically just like a line with a tick box is classed as a task. And you can also have conditional creation. You can make it so that every Monday a task is in your note that says prepare for the week or something. I can't think of actual examples apparently, but I have a friend that would every Friday had a series of tasks that would show up that were her end of week things. And this is really good for that. So the daily note, I would jot down any to-dos for the day. I would review any outstanding tasks I still haven't done. I used to have a query in my daily note that showed me any tasks that were due before that day but hadn't been done yet. I've moved that onto my dashboard now, but that was handy when I had it there before I figured out dashboards were cool. And it's just a good place to jot down anything specific to that day. Maybe you don't need to create a whole note for some information you need to write down. Maybe it can just live in that day's note if that's what you like. I should note that the periodic notes plugin is what I use to make my daily, weekly, and monthly notes. It can also do quarterly and yearly notes if that's your vibe, but the Obsidian core plugin does handle just daily notes or can be edited to do just weekly notes or just monthly notes, whatever you might want. And this is an example of me creating a daily note, and the template has inserted and me ticking off a task. And we're going to take a look at what my template contains. That picture is not great, but I'm going to have smaller pictures after this. So we have three main interesting sections to the template. First, we have a link to the month note that will be created when I click on it because it has a full path. And this is, so the core template plugin has something that's called template variables that allow you to insert corresponding values such as the current date using moment.js format tokens or all sorts of different things. You can insert the title. Templater has even more options. And this is the conditional creation I talked about earlier. This uses the templater plugin. I'll talk more about that later as well. Basically, it's just grabbing the current day and wraps different content in some if-else checks, and then it will only add the content that corresponds to that thing. So Monday, it will only add my start of week tasks. And this is the tasks query, so it's just a little code block with tasks written, and that means that's telling the plugin, please display a list of certain tasks. And in this case, it's done on date that will be inserted, and I hide a couple of things. Tasks is a really good plugin, and I find the queries to write are very easy to understand and use and don't require programming knowledge, unlike DataView, which is kind of based on SQL and the documentation is a little obscure. and hard to work out how to use it, but tasks, I find the documentation is fantastic and really great to use. So a newer addition to my process was a weekly note. I have a little automation that when I press a hotkey will fill a table with any notes of a certain type that I've edited that week. So for example, it might only pull from project notes, or at my personal vault, it also pulls from study notes and stuff. I'll talk about how I automated that later. And this is just a quick example of creating the weekly note. And note, it also creates a bunch of files as well, which I'll talk about why we do that. But yeah, this is another breakdown. And this is how you embed a note into another note. And at this point in time, we're embedding a note that doesn't exist yet. But when I create the template, it will create those notes and they will become embedded in that note and will display. And this is where I put all the information for feature work I've worked on, or research or study. And this is what creates the additional notes. So templater code, templater allows you to have code in your templates that will execute when the template is inserted. So here I'm just basically telling it, I want these notes to have this content in them, which is just temp for now. And then it just goes and creates them. Templater documentation is also pretty good. Templater does require some setup. You need to tell it where your templates live, tell it to trigger on new file creation, and then you're pretty much good to go. It will only trigger when there's something in the template that it recognizes as something it needs to execute on. Otherwise, it will not do anything. And monthly notes. This is an outdated part of my process at work. I used to write down relevant tickets that I was working on in tasks in a month note manually, which was terrible and awful. But this allowed me to tick them off and have something that displayed later all the tickets that I'd done that week for stand-up. But I've made that much nicer. I use bases now, which hopefully I'll get to later. But yeah, this was a long-lasting remnant of my manual work stuff that I didn't automate away straight away, but finally have, and it's been much nicer than, yeah. But the template itself is not very exciting because all it is was a place for me to manually write related tickets. And so clicking on that, I don't know how well you can actually see these GIFs, but it's not particularly exciting, this example, but you can manually insert templates yourself using the command palette, or I believe you can have a button on your sidebar as well. And this is me manually adding, and then I manually added a link to another note. I can't believe I did that for so long. But let's quickly talk about my project organization to accompany existing project and task management software. Not replace it in this instance. So there's a couple of ways to set up note creation. I've shown a way of manually doing it. You can also use Templater to automatically add templates to notes created in a certain folder. Or you can create a note and use a hotkey, or yeah. Also, the other route to take is the Quick Add plugin, in which you can do stuff like it will pop up a little dialog where you can name the note, then it will pop up another dialog and you can fill in a description, and then it will create the note in the folder you want it to be in. which is great. Like, I love automating away friction, creating notes and creating notes in the right place with the right information. So the templater route, I've mentioned it a couple of times now, but basically it's just a template language that allows you to insert variables and functions results into your notes. And you can also, if you so wish, let it execute JavaScript code to manipulate those variables and functions. Depends how technical you want to dive into it. And this is just where you would set it up. So you tell it what folder you want it to be in and what template, and whenever you create a note in that folder, it will insert that template, which is very handy. And this is just an example of what a ticket note template might look like. We've got another template of variable here, file.title, that will insert the name of the note into here. So if you happen to name your notes in a way that you can have the URL to the corresponding ticket or whatever, you can automate away having to paste that URL into your note like I have. And so I always have a note and can easily click and go back to the relating ticket. And you can also, another way to create notes is you can open the search bar and start typing in a path. And if that note doesn't exist yet, it will just create it for you in that location. And that's just what it looks like after inserting. It's not particularly exciting. And I filled out some details. So I have a type and a feature. So those are the properties I typically have on my ticket note. So I can be like, is it a task? Is it a bug? What is it related to? And then a description, because I like to display them in a table on my dashboard. And the name of the ticket is usually a number, and that's not going to tell me anything about what that is related to. I need a description. I unfortunately cannot remember 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is about make a different thing happen. And then there's the quick add route. So it basically gives you a bunch of choices. There's the template choice where it will create a note and insert a template. There's the capture choice where you can give it information and then it can insert that into a template. And then macro, which allows you to do multiple choices at once, execute code, execute Obsidian commands. Anything Obsidian can do, you can access within the quick add UI to be like, and tell it to do that. You don't even have to write code to use quick add, but you can. And this is just setting up a template choice for a task ticket. And we're just setting the template path, what folder it goes in, and to open it upon creation, which is important because we want to insert some data in after it's created, so we need it open. And this is the capture. It shows a little pop-up dialog, and then puts in the active file. And now we have a macro choice where we will set up the two choices, and they will execute one after the other. And as you can see here, you can do stuff like user scripts, you can write your own scripts to execute. There's all the editor commands are available to you. You can add them into your macro and they will all execute one after the other. So you can set up a lot of stuff in Quick Add without ever writing any code, which is great, I think. And yeah, and then you can set them up under basically like a folder type thing, and you can assign hotkeys to it. You can make it a command that you can pin. And this is just an example of it working. Yep. But why do I do this? Well, I was already keeping notes on my current tasks or bugs as I went, because I have a terrible memory, and I find it helps to write stuff down as well to reference later. So I started keeping a dedicated note to it, and it's come in handy in quite a few circumstances where we've come across another bug and it sounds really familiar to me, and so I search my vault and I'm like, yeah, a similar thing has happened at this point in time, and here's a link to it, and yeah. But I'm going to very quickly go over my standalone management for smaller projects. Basically, I have a template that is my overview note, and the idea is for it to display all research, feature, and bug notes and what their status is. So it's just like my dashboard note for a given project. And I use data view for it, which is just basically, it just displays notes in a certain folder of a certain type, and then I do some fancy stuff to grab the status tag and only display the end of it, because it's a nested tag, which you can do. So I should have had a slide about what nested tags were in hindsight, but you can ask me later. I love talking about Obsidian. And this is just the template for a feature note, and I haven't talked much about how I organize my notes in my personal vault, but I organize them kind of with tags. I have a context, I have a type, so what type of note is it? This is a feature note. I have a context, so what is the context this note is in? This is a project context. I also have a study context or a writing context. And then theme would be, say if this feature was about automation, then we'd set the theme to automation. Maybe it's about pathfinding. Maybe it could be anything. And then status is pretty self-explanatory, to do, in progress, and completed. And yeah, this is an example of it working. So I can just name my project, and then it's created a whole folder, and in each folder, in that folder is a bunch of other folders in which I organize my features, research, and bugs. And I wrote a script to set this up. I'm not going to go into, you don't need to read all that. If you'd like to see this again, feel free to come talk to me. But basically, you can do stuff like you can access the Quick Add API within JavaScript. You can also access all of the Obsidian API, and you can access the API of, I believe, any plugin to manipulate what you want to do. So I wrote this because I'm a huge nerd, but you could probably set this up in Quick Add without the code. And maybe I'll figure out how to do that as a fun exercise so that I can show that off. But yeah. And this section is just, we're adding it to an existing project. I didn't really go into the different parts of this, but basically I'm just getting an input prompt and a suggester, and it's popping up with, what do you want to name it? Do you want to add to an existing project? Do you want to create a new project? Stuff like that. And you can also have associated settings, so you don't have to hard code everything. Some of that was hard coded, but I just haven't gotten around to fixing that. I will. And that's what the settings look like. Very exciting. The dashboard. Quickly display info using data view bases and tasks. I've mentioned data view before. It's a live index and query engine over your personal knowledge base. It kind of, before Obsidian introduced bases, it was the best way to get Obsidian into a database-ish place where you could display tables of information on your notes. And sometimes I just like to keep track of certain features. So I have a section of my dashboard that's just like this feature that I'm always working on and I'm kind of responsible for, so I want to quickly reference stuff I've done on it. And it's a pretty easy little query, although if you don't it looks simple, but I could do a whole talk on how data view works, actually. But there's not enough time for that. And this is, sometimes I want to see outstanding tasks or what I've done that week. The task query is quite easy to understand as compared to data view. I love data view, but if you don't understand SQL, it's an uphill battle, which is why I was excited when Obsidian brought in bases, which is another built-in database thing, which I will show something about very soon. And this was my old manual process. Yep, I've ticked it off and it's displayed in there. That's so much manual things to remember to keep doing. Why did I do that for a year while I was automating other things, but not that? I don't know. But this is the task query that displays it. So the language is great. Done this week or done last week. Heading includes tickets. Path includes. It's great. This is base. This is a base, not note. It's a base table. It's a table being displayed with bases, their new feature, and it's much nicer. I'll show you what the actual query looks like in a second, but you can do cool stuff like you can set up multiple views that you can switch between. You can, anything that you edit, like if you resize a column, it adds to the code snippet and remembers it. So in here, you might notice there's a line called column size. I did not manually set that. I resized it and it remembered and it just added it, which was very handy. And yeah, so it's pretty straightforward, and I'm going to break it down quickly. And we firstly have a global to the query filters section where I'm specifying a folder. Then we have the views that I'm setting up. So I have a this week and last week, and we've got filters again, so you can then have a filter that stacks on top of your global filter that's just for that view. And then you can just tell it what to display. So file.name, that's the file's metadata, then description and type. And yeah. Unfortunately, Basis doesn't support inline properties. So while data view does, that's specifically a data view plugin thing. So my notes where I had the description and then something that was inserted using quick add, that won't work for this, unfortunately. So I haven't quite worked out how I want to automate filling in a description for my notes anymore, but I'm sure I'll figure that out at some point. At the moment, I am manually writing into the property the description. And yeah, my project work automation. So this is what it looks like when I press my hotkey and it tells me everything I've done that week. And I will quickly show off. Oh, yeah, why do I do that though? Yeah, that's a good question. Persistence. A lot of these queries that I've shown you on my dashboard, they relate to a moment in time, and when that time is passed, they display the next moment in time. So I can't go, what did I do last month on my dashboard? It will just show me what I did that week. My brain is very, what did I even do that week? And I needed something that I could go back and check. So that's why I started doing this. And this is a whole heap of templater code. looks very intimidating, but most of it is just, it's 3 main sections again. And so we're grabbing access to our data view API and we're setting up variables. And this is the main bit. This is telling it, these are the queries I want to get information from. These are the queries that are going to run, grab some information, and then format it into markdown and then return that value for me. And then I'm going to write that value into a note. That way, and then it formats a nice little markdown table. And basically the way I figured out what I wanted to write in here was just writing data view queries in a separate note and going, okay, and tweaking it until it displayed the kind of information I wanted. And then I was like, all right, and I put it into here. And then this is just creating, well, this is grabbing the query markdown is what runs all of that stuff that I talked about, that I just said. It grabs, it runs the query, gives me the output. I also check if the file exists because it's good to not write to files that don't exist. Because Obsidian doesn't like that. And yeah, I access the app .vault API and modify a file. Now, where do I talk about this? So you might have wondered why I had separate files for each feature, research, study, whatever, why I don't just insert this output directly into my weekly note. And that's just because it's simpler to do it this way. It's easier than me trying to work out what information is now out of date, what information am I accidentally overriding. It's easier to have separate notes and just embed them into my weekly note, basically. I could probably spend time and figure out a fancy way of making them all work in the one note, but this was faster and it works. So, and I also have the template hooked up to a hotkey, which is another thing you can do. And then, yeah, that's the hotkey. It does insert some white space into my note, unfortunately, but that's fine. I'll fix it one day. But I can run this anywhere. I can be in any note whatsoever, hit this hotkey, and it will go and do it in the right note and update it, and then it's brilliant. I was going to quickly talk about my very first automation, which was when I realized I had to record my work from home hours for tax reasons. And I realized I didn't want to fill out a spreadsheet because that felt like a lot of effort. And so I decided to leverage the Quick Add API and use that instead. So it basically, I didn't remember to put a GIF in of what this looks like, but basically it just comes up with different, like 4 prompts. It asks me, where did I work from that day? I always write home if I'm filling it out, but maybe I want to log office hours one day, I don't know. And then it asks me, when did I start? Then it asks me for my lunch break. I don't know why I added that, but I think I wanted to track intentional time taking lunch. So I was like, I'm going to add this to this as well, you know, do multiple things at once. And then it asks me my end time. And then it inserts this template down the bottom. And the cool thing about Quick Add is you can assign information to different variables in your script, export them, and then when you insert a template, it will insert that information. So value worked from. Very handy. And the last thing I'm going to show is how you would search for stuff in your Vault. Basically, you can look up properties, In the first one, so I'm looking up a specific feature, you can stack them, so you can be like, I want feature 1, you could be like, I want a task that is related to feature 1 and feature 2, and it will show you all tasks that have those properties. You can also search by tags, and then you can just search by anything. And if you don't like Obsidian's built-in search, there's the Omni Search plugin, and I can't explain what the difference is. I have read about what algorithm they use for it, but I've forgotten it now. But it is a nicer search. So if you find you're not finding what you want as effectively, maybe try OmniSearch. Anyway, final hot tips / remarks. Basically, my big thing is the less friction you have to creating a note for something and creating it in the right place, the more organized you'll probably stay. I say probably because even I sometimes, my inbox folder in my personal vault has a few things in it that I should put somewhere, but I just haven't yet. It doesn't seem as important as sorting out my work vault. And yeah, the inbox folder is my biggest, like, I'd say definitely try it. I also have a bunch of, if you feel like reading about a whole book on the para method, you can. I'd say read that blog post first and see if you want to read a whole book on it, but absolutely. And that's documentation for all the plugins that I've mentioned. I didn't link the bases stuff, but that's just, you can find that on the Obsidian website as well. And that is the end. Thank you. I'd like to give a special thanks to my cat, Guinea. He helped me by lying on my keyboard whenever I was trying to write this talk, and also trying to eat my Ethernet cable whenever I tried to do a run-through of this talk. So very helpful. So I was prepared if any one of you came and tried to eat a cable. So thank you, Guinea. You can find me on Blue Sky. Please feel free to tell me your favorite thing about Obsidian if you have one, or if you have one in the future. There's probably not really much time for questions, but you can absolutely come talk to me and ask me anything. Thank you.